Chapter 1: The Moment She Chose to Speak. The coffee shop on Mercer Street had two kinds of regulars: the ones who came for the overpriced espresso and the ones who came for the ritual. Claire fell into the latter category. Every Sunday morning for the past 3 years, she and Ethan had claimed the corner table by the window. Rain or shine, hangover or heartbreak, they were always there. 2 mugs, 1 crossword puzzle, and the same easy, familiar laughter that had built a quiet home in her chest. Claire stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, watching Ethan scribble something into the newspaper with his usual smirk of concentration. His dark hair flopped over his forehead, and he absently pushed it back, a gesture she had memorized years ago. "I still think 7 across is ironic, not iconic," she said, sipping carefully. Ethan glanced up. "Claire, you're arguing with a man who once solved an entire crossword with Taylor Swift lyrics. I think I know my way around a cultural reference." She smiled, because that's what she always did when he teased her. But today, the smile didn't reach her eyes, because today was different. Claire had rehearsed the words 100 times, in the mirror, in the shower. Into her pillow at 2 a.m., "I love you." Simple, honest, final. It wasn't a decision she'd made lightly. Loving Ethan had always felt like breathing, natural, constant, and unnoticed until it started to hurt. There had been moments, too many really, that hinted at something deeper. The way he once wiped tears from her face without asking what was wrong, the way his hand lingered too long when they hugged, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking. And then there was last week. They'd gone to that rooftop concert, just the two of them. He'd had his arm slung around the back of her chair, his hand brushing her shoulder, his laugh close enough to feel. And then for a second, their eyes had met, and the air shifted. He hadn't looked away. She thought, no, hoped. He'd felt it too. So she'd chosen today. A Sunday. Safe. Familiar. She even wore the sweater he once said made her eyes look like storm clouds, just in case it counted for something. "I need to tell you something," she said, cutting through the silence. Ethan looked up from the crossword, pen poised midair. "Yeah?" Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She drew in a shaky breath. "I've been thinking about us. About—" "Oh," Ethan interrupted, sitting up straighter. "That reminds me, I have something to tell you too. Actually, someone." Claire blinked. "Someone?" He nodded, his grin stretching wide and unguarded. "Her name's Lena. We met at that trivia night last month. Remember when I ditched you halfway through the music round? That was her fault." Claire's stomach dropped, but her face didn't flinch. "She's great," he went on, oblivious to the sound of her heart cracking in two. "Funny, smart, kind of a book nerd like you. And it's early, but I don't know, Claire. I really like her. I'm trying to do things right this time, you know? No games, no mixed signals." Her hands curled tightly around her coffee cup. "That's great, Ethan. I'm happy for you." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You always know how to make me feel like I'm not screwing everything up." She smiled. She didn't say that he'd just obliterated the one moment she'd been holding on to for months. She didn't tell him that every almost in their past had led her to this single moment of truth that had now turned into a punchline. Instead, she listened. She asked questions about Lena, nodded in all the right places, and laughed at something Ethan said, even though her throat burned. By the time they left the cafe, the air had turned cold and brittle. Ethan tossed an arm around her shoulders like he always did, and she let him. But it didn't feel the same. Not anymore. She walked home alone, the confession still lodged in her throat, like a song that would never be sung. And later, lying in bed, she thought about what it meant to be a good friend. It meant showing up. It meant caring even when it hurt. It meant watching someone you love fall for someone else and cheering them on anyway. She pressed her phone to her chest, Ethan's last message still glowing on the screen. "Thanks for always being my person. I don't know what I'd do without you." Claire closed her eyes and whispered into the silence, "I love you." But it was too late. Chapter 2: The Weight of Silence. The worst part wasn't that Ethan had found someone. The worst part was that he wouldn't stop talking about her. It started subtly, an offhand remark here, a reference there. "I asked Lena what her favorite movie was, and you'll never believe it. It's that weird French one you love, the one where no one talks for like 20 minutes. Claire chuckled, eyes fixed on the sink full of dishes. "Amélie. It's not weird. It's whimsical." Ethan grinned. Exactly, you and Lena would get along. It wasn't the first time he'd said that. Lately, it felt like he was always connecting the dots between them, as if pairing Lena and Claire in his mind gave him permission to drag his new girlfriend into the space Claire used to occupy alone. They still talked nearly every day, still met for drinks after work, or exchanged sarcastic texts during boring meetings. But now, Ethan brought Lena into every conversation like a guest who never left. Claire played her part. She asked the right questions. She listened to stories about Lena's cat, Lena's job, Lena's quirky habit of alphabetizing her spice rack. And every time, Claire told herself this was what best friends did. But something was changing. Something Claire hadn't expected. Ethan was slipping away. It started with the little things. He stopped texting her goodnight like he used to, stopped calling her during long walks just to keep her company. He skipped their Sunday crossword for the second week in a row with a quick, Lena wanted to hit the flea market, and an easy apology Claire couldn't bring herself to accept or reject. That Sunday afternoon, Claire sat alone in their usual cafe, the crossword untouched in front of her, her coffee going cold. She stared out the window, watching couples walk by with linked hands and shared laughter, and for a moment she felt completely invisible, like something sacred had quietly unraveled without ceremony or permission. She thought back to another time, 3 years ago, when she and Ethan had taken a spontaneous road trip upstate. It had been one of those too hot to breathe August weekends, and they'd driven with the windows down, music blasting, sunscreen melting off their skin. That night, they'd stopped at a tiny lake motel, the kind that still used real keys and had mint green bedspreads. They sat on the dock, legs dangling over the water, passing a bottle of warm red wine between them. Claire had made a joke about the stars, how they looked like they were trying too hard. Ethan had turned to her, eyes soft. You know, sometimes I wonder if we're stuck like this. Like what? She asked, though she'd known what he meant. He shrugged. Circling. Always close, never quite there. She hadn't responded. Neither had kissed the other. But when she woke up the next morning with her head on his chest and his arm around her waist, she'd let herself believe that someday, maybe, they'd get it right. Back then, there had been no Lena, no other names or spaces between them. Now, that memory felt like a postcard from a place that no longer existed. Claire folded up the untouched crossword, left a few dollars on the table, and walked home. That evening, Ethan called. She hesitated, staring at his name on the screen, before finally picking up. Hey, stranger, she said, forcing cheer into her voice. Sorry about today, he said. I know we were supposed to meet, but Lena's sister was in town, and... It's fine, Claire cut in quickly. Too quickly. He paused. You sure? Of course. She walked to the window and looked out. How's it going with her? Ethan let out a sigh, but not a bad one. More like the sound someone makes when they're letting happiness settle in their chest. It's easy. I don't know how else to explain it. With Lena, it's just peaceful. Claire bit the inside of her cheek. That's good. You deserve peaceful. You think so? She nodded, even though he couldn't see. Yeah, I really do. And she meant it, or at least part of her did. But the rest? The part that once believed their story was just waiting for its right chapter, it ached. After they hung up, she spent the evening flipping through old photos on her phone. Her and Ethan at the Halloween party junior year, both dressed as ridiculous puns, him asleep on her couch with popcorn in his hair, a blurry shot of him laughing in the rain. She came across one she'd forgotten, him looking at her from across a campfire, his face illuminated by the glow. She remembered that night. They'd talked about what love might feel like. And Ethan had said, I think it's just the person you want to come home to, even when you're already home. She remembered how warm her cheeks had felt when he said that. She wondered if he'd been talking about her. Claire shut her phone off and curled into the corner of her couch, wrapping herself in the silence he used to fill. Somewhere between the laughter and the late-night talks, she'd built a home in him. And now he was redecorating with someone else. Chapter 3. The question that changed everything. By February, things had shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly, but in the way old bridges creak before they break. Ethan still smiled when Lena kissed him, still texted Claire funny memes about their favorite terrible reality shows. But something was off. The air around him had changed. Conversations with Lena grew shorter. Calls with Claire more frequent, though he rarely noticed the imbalance. Claire had. She always did. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. Ethan and Lena still posted pictures, sunlightings at farmers markets, blurry date nights, half-eaten shared desserts. But Claire had known him long enough to read the spaces between the smiles, the tension in his eyes, the distant undertone in his voice when he said things like, "or she's great." The truth was, he was trying. But it looked like forcing puzzle pieces into the wrong picture. What he didn't see, what he refused to see, was that he kept measuring Lena against something he couldn't define. An invisible standard made of late-night talks and years of layered trust. A quiet rhythm that only existed with one person. Claire. It wasn't that he said her name constantly. It was how he said it. Like home. Like habit. Like a fact of his life. And Lena noticed. The confrontation came on a Wednesday night. They were meant to be cooking dinner together, Ethan chopping onions, Lena scrolling through a playlist. It should have been easy, like it had been the first month. But tonight, everything felt off-key. "Hey," Lena said, stirring the sauce a little too hard. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan looked up from the cutting board. "Sure. Do you realize how often you talk about Claire?" He blinked. "What?" Lena set the spoon down with a soft clink. "I'm serious. I like her, okay? I really do. She's funny and warm, and she clearly knows you better than anyone, but sometimes it feels like I'm dating someone who's halfway in another relationship." Ethan stared at her, stunned. "Claire's my best friend, that's all." Lena crossed her arms. "But is it? Because when we're together, it's always Claire who gets the first call when something happens. It's Claire you look to when you need to decompress. Half your stories start with 'Claire and I once,' like I'm just the latest chapter in a book that was already written." Ethan opened his mouth, but no explanation came. "She's in your heart, Ethan," Lena said, softer now, "even if you don't realize it." "That's not fair," he said quietly. "Claire's been in my life for years. We've been through everything together. Of course I talk about her." "I'm not asking you to cut her out," Lena said. "I'm asking if you're really here with me, or if you're still stuck in something you never let yourself explore." Ethan frowned. "You're making it sound like I'm in love with her." "Are you?" Lena asked. He froze. Lena stepped closer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "If Claire told you she loved you, what would you do?" The room fell silent. Ethan's mind was suddenly spinning, moving backwards, flipping through years of memories. Claire in that ridiculous witch costume in college. Claire holding his hand in the waiting room the day his dad had surgery. Claire falling asleep next to him during a movie marathon, her head on his shoulder like it belonged there. He remembered that night on the rooftop last fall. How close they were. How still she had gone when their eyes locked. Something had been there, hanging unspoken between them, and he'd ignored it. He started, then stopped. Lena nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "That's what I thought." The fight ended with Lena asking for space. Ethan didn't stop her. He sat on the floor for a long time after the door closed, his back against the wall, eyes unfocused. In the stillness, the question echoed again and again. "If Claire told you she loved you, what would you do?" He had no answer, but suddenly he needed one. Claire heard about the fight 2 days later, not from Ethan. He'd gone quiet, which was how she knew it was serious. It was Hannah who told her over lunch. "It was bad," she said, biting into her sandwich. "Lena basically accused him of being emotionally unavailable because of you." Claire's stomach sank. "Because of me?" She said he's stuck on you or something, that he talks about you more than her, that maybe he doesn't even realize how deep it runs. Claire laughed, dry, disbelieving. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Claire looked away. That night, she sat in her apartment, phone beside her like a loaded weapon. She kept thinking about Lena's words, secondhand as they were, and then she thought about the way Ethan used to turn to her for everything, about how he hadn't lately, how Lena had taken up the space Claire used to quietly occupy, and how even now the loss felt like trying to breathe with only half a lung. She wanted to call him, to ask if it was true. Instead, she pulled on her coat and walked aimlessly through the city, her thoughts louder than the traffic. For a long time, she'd clung to the idea that loving Ethan in silence was better than losing him completely. But now, Now it felt like her silence had slowly broken something that was never hers to begin with. And worse, her presence might be breaking what was his. Claire stopped at the edge of the bridge, the wind lashing cold against her cheeks. She stared out at the city lights flickering across the water, and for the first time, she wondered, what if I've been the one holding him back? She didn't cry. Not yet. But her heart had already started to unravel. That was part one of The Confession Came Too Late, and the heartbreak's just getting started. Claire's love is still unspoken. Ethan's world is starting to shift, and everything they thought was safe is about to change. Subscribe or follow now so you don't miss part two, where secrets unravel, hearts break a little more, and maybe, just maybe, love starts to find its way home. Part two drops soon. Stay tuned. Stay heartful.